he suddenly realized that the massive tree beside him was about to fall. At that very moment, his son was standing exactly where the tree was about to crash down. He screamed with all his strength, desperately telling his son to run away. But the young boy was already so terrified that his legs went weak and his eyes were frozen wide open. The boy stood there in a daze, watching the tree slam toward him at terrifying speed. And seeing this, the father had no choice but to sprint toward his son. With all his strength, he shoved his son several meters away, while he himself was instantly buried beneath the falling tree. Still unable to recover from the shock, the boy slowly got up and saw his father trapped under the tree, barely clinging to life, as if he wanted to say something, yet never managed to speak a single word. Just like that, the father left him forever. The boy's name was Tomo. Born into an ordinary family in England, he had two older brothers, and the eldest was born with an intellectual disability, his mental age forever frozen at 6 years old. The second brother was brave, strong-willed, and responsible, and he was always extremely protective of young Tomo. Several times, he got into fights with others to protect Tomo, and in the end, the teacher punished him harshly, leaving him barely able to sit. Yet the second brother would still act as if nothing had happened, comforting Tomo by saying that his body was made of iron. Tomo's father and mother were deeply in love with each other. The family once lived a happy and simple life, but no one expected that accidents always arrive without warning. On this day, Tomo followed his father into the forest to cut trees, and Tomo suddenly asked a question that his father could not answer. He asked his father, "Among your 3 sons, which one do you love the most?" This sudden and impossible question instantly put the father in a painful dilemma. The father told Tomo, "You are all my sons, and every one of you is my greatest love." But the stubborn Tomo insisted that his father choose one, because he believed his father would surely pick the lively, adorable, and youngest one, himself. The father jokingly said to him, "My favorite is your second brother, because he is brave, strong, and responsible, a little man who has not yet grown up." The moment the father said this, Tomo took it seriously, turned around in anger, and ran off. Ignoring his father's calls, he ran as fast as he could. After running for who knows how long, he accidentally spotted a dead little mouse on the ground, immediately bent down, dug a small hole, and buried it. At that moment, he suddenly remembered what his teacher had once told them, that parents give us life and protect us with everything they have, and no matter when or where, we must always be grateful to them and love them deeply. So he returned to his father's side and softly apologized to him, but the distance was too great, and his father did not hear a word. And right at that moment, the tree his father had just cut suddenly began to sway, and then came crashing down toward Tomo. In order to save Tomo, the father ultimately gave his own life. Through his actions, he answered the question Tomo had asked earlier. Only at this moment did Tomo realize that his father had never lied to him, and that all 3 sons were the ones he loved enough to sacrifice his life for. Sadly, Tomo understood this truth far too late. He secretly stood by the doorway, watching his mother sob as she cleaned his father's body, and as he looked at his father's lifeless form, Tomo remained completely silent. His father's death became a shadow he would never escape for the rest of his life. In his mind, it was he who had caused his father's death. If he had been brave and decisive like his second brother, and had listened to his father and run away quickly, his father would not have given his life to save him. But no matter how much he blamed himself or how heartbroken he was, his father would never wake up again. They had only just buried their father when the local landowner came to see Tomo's mother. The house Tomo's family lived in had been provided for free when the landowner hired the father as a caretaker. Now that the father was gone, the landowner needed the house for the newly hired caretaker to live in. This meant that from that moment on, Tomo's family would have no home. Once the house was taken back, the woman would be left on the streets with her 3 children. In the end, to keep the house and to prevent the family from becoming homeless, the woman had no choice but to agree to work in the landowner's home as a maid, taking care of his sick wife. Her second son was also forced to drop out of school and work at the landowner's dog farm. In order to improve the family's meals, the youngest son decided to go hunting in the landowner's forest with his second brother. Before long, they successfully caught a wild rabbit, but to their shock, the second brother was snagged by a trap he had set himself. At that very moment, the landowner's newly hired caretaker happened to be patrolling nearby. The landowner had declared the forest to be his property, so every blade of grass and every wild animal within it naturally belonged to him as well. Catching rabbits in the forest was considered theft, and once discovered, a brutal beating would be unavoidable. The second brother told Tomo to run, but Tomo insisted on staying together. No matter what, All of this was witnessed by the caretaker's daughter. Not only did she refuse to expose the brothers, she also helped lure her patrolling father away, allowing the brothers to narrowly escape punishment for stealing. On this day, Tamo was bullied by boys at school once again. In the past, whenever he was bullied, his second brother would rush out to protect him, but now his brother had dropped out of school to work at the landowner's dog farm, leaving the helpless Tamo retreating again and again. Just as he was being forced into a corner against the wall, a girl suddenly appeared and chased the boys away. That girl was the caretaker's daughter who had helped them in the forest a few days earlier. She not only drove away the boys who bullied Tamo, but also carefully cleaned his wounds. Her gentle care completely captured Tamo's first awakening feelings of love. Tamo quietly swore to himself that when he grew up, he would marry Molly. From that day on, Tamo, his brother, and Molly became close friends, and time flew by in their playful companionship. At this point, Tamo worked at the landowner's dog farm alongside his second brother, and Molly had also become a maid in the landowner's household. One day, the landowner came to the dog farm and decided to shoot an old dog, because to him, the dog no longer had any value. Tamo desperately begged the landowner not to kill the old dog, because it was Molly's favorite, but the landowner said the dog was his property, and he had the right to decide whether it lived or died. As he spoke, he handed the gun to Tamo's second brother and told him to deal with it quickly. Although the second brother had always been obedient and never caused trouble, for Tamo's sake, he pretended to fire the gun, and while the landowner was not paying attention, he slipped the old dog into a sack and carried it out of the dog farm. The two brothers brought the old dog back home together, but they never imagined that the landowner would see through their little trick and drive straight to their house. Their mother rushed to stop him, but she was no match for the furious landowner, and soon he forced his way into the room. The landowner wanted to send the two brothers to prison for stealing the dog. After learning the full story, their mother repeatedly apologized to the landowner, then took out the money she had painstakingly saved and bought the old dog. The landowner no longer insisted on sending the brothers to prison, but he decisively fired them from the dog farm. Just like that, for the sake of an old dog that Molly loved, the brothers lost the jobs they depended on to survive. To earn money and support the family, they began taking odd jobs and doing farm labor wherever they could. Farm work was exhausting and painful, and far less easy than working at the dog farm. Yet the brothers remained full of joy, because no matter what, they had succeeded in saving the old dog. The old dog was Molly's favorite, and Molly was also the one the brothers loved most. But there was only one Molly in the world, and between the two brothers who had always been inseparable, a cruel romantic rivalry was destined to unfold. One day, they brought the old dog they had worked so hard to save to visit Molly, but instead, they were viciously driven away by Molly's father. Molly's father forbade her from seeing the two brothers again, because they had lost their jobs just to save an old dog. In Molly's father's eyes, young men without proper work were nothing but idle parasites on society. With no other choice, the brothers could only leave in shame. That night, Tamo lay in bed and asked his second brother whether they would never be able to see Molly again. The second brother could only comfort him, telling him not to worry and that everything would get better. After that, Tamo often went alone to stand outside Molly's house, waiting for a chance to see his beloved Molly just once more. But for many days in a row, he never caught sight of her, until one day, he finally saw Molly patrolling the forest with her father. Molly also spotted Tamo hiding behind a tree, and she immediately ran toward him. But before they could exchange more than a few words, Molly's father noticed them, and she had no choice but to leave once again. That brief encounter gave Tamo the illusion that he was secretly meeting a lover, so he mistakenly believed that he and Molly had already fallen deeply in love. But an illusion was still just an illusion, because Molly and Tamo's second brother were the ones truly in love. Completely unaware of this, Tamo stood by the river, thinking about how to confess his feelings to his beloved Molly, until one day, Tamo returned home with his second brother and suddenly found Molly sitting inside their house, only to learn that she was already carrying the second brother's child. Hearing the news, the second brother was shocked and overjoyed, while Tamo, standing behind him, felt as if all the beauty in the world had instantly collapsed. Before long, the second brother and Molly held a wedding in the church and officially became husband and wife. Watching the sweet smile on his brother's face, Tamo's heart filled with anger and bitterness. He never imagined that the brother who once fought others for him and carried him to school every day would quietly take away the one he loved most. At this time, he still did not understand that love is a matter between two people. It was not that his brother stole his love, but that Molly chose his brother. On their wedding night, the second brother and Molly lay together, laughing and dreaming about a beautiful future. But Tomo, filled with grief and resentment, tossed and turned, unable to sleep at all. From that moment on, the once inseparable brothers were plagued by constant conflict and frequent clashes, and it was at this time that the First World War broke out. While out one day, Tomo happened to see a recruitment officer delivering a speech encouraging people to enlist. Having lost the one he loved and already drowning in despair, Tomo decided to leave this place of sorrow. So he lied about his age and signed up for the army, preparing to go to the front lines to prove himself and make up for his heartbreak. When the second brother learned that Tomo had enlisted, he was overwhelmed with anger and sorrow, desperately scolding Tomo for being so reckless. He knew that Tomo had joined the army on impulse after losing the woman he loved. But now, Tomo's enlistment was an unchangeable fact. Although the second brother had no desire to go to the front lines to serve political interests, in order to protect Tomo, he ultimately said goodbye to his new wife and volunteered to join the army as well. From then on, the brothers began a life surrounded by the flames of war. He was suddenly stopped by an old soldier, who was drunk and angrily scolded him for not saluting, pointing at the 3 stripes on his uniform to prove his rank. Seeing this, Charlie smiled helplessly and said that 3 stripes only meant he was a non-commissioned officer, not a commissioned officer. We are essentially the same rank, so there is no need for me to salute you. As he spoke, he took the wine from the old soldier's hand and turned away. At this moment, Charlie had no idea that he had already offended a narrow-minded and vindictive non-commissioned officer. Soon, Charlie arrived at the front line together with his younger brother and other comrades. Only then did he suddenly realize that his immediate superior was the very same drunken sergeant he had encountered in the tavern days earlier. Petty and extremely resentful, the sergeant walked straight up to Charlie and warned him that disrespecting him would lead to serious consequences. That very night, Charlie and his brother Tomo were assigned by the sergeant to serve as sentries. Facing their first time on guard duty, the brothers stayed fully alert, eyes wide open, constantly scanning everything in front of them. They were terrified that German troops might suddenly launch a surprise attack. Fortunately, aside from a few stray shots, no enemy ambush occurred. Just before dawn, Tomo suddenly noticed a vague figure appearing in the mist, and the figure seemed to be wearing a gas mask. It was only then that he realized what filled the air was not mist at all, but poison gas. He immediately shouted a warning, and all the soldiers panicked as they put on their gas masks, then hurriedly retreated under the sergeant's command. Charlie quickly grabbed his brother and followed the sergeant in retreat, but the next second, another soldier slammed into Tomo, knocking him violently aside. Unaware of what had happened, Charlie continued retreating with the sergeant, leaving behind a terrified Tomo curled up on the ground, trembling uncontrollably and screaming in fear. Soon, a German soldier who rushed into the trench discovered Tomo. Tomo desperately begged for mercy, and the German soldier could tell from his voice that Tomo was still just a child. After hesitating for a few seconds, he gestured for Tomo to leave, and Tomo narrowly survived. As soon as the gas dispersed, Tomo followed his brother Charlie and the remaining soldiers in a counterattack against the German forces, attempting to retake the position they had just lost. During the battle, Charlie was wounded in his right leg and had to be sent back to England to recover. Before leaving, he tightly grasped Tomo's clothes and told him to make sure he protected himself. Though filled with reluctance, Tomo could only watch helplessly as his brother on the stretcher slowly disappeared from view. No sooner had Charlie left than the narrow-minded sergeant suddenly appeared. He insulted Charlie, claiming that he had wounded himself on purpose just to escape the battlefield. Furious and determined to defend his brother's honor, Tomo immediately tried to rush forward to attack the sergeant. Thankfully, his comrades reacted quickly and tightly restrained the enraged Tomo. After his brother left, the lonely Tomo was forced to face the constant gunfire alone every single day. They charged again and again, the German forces counterattacked again and again, and a small stretch of land only a few hundred square meters wide changed hands repeatedly, leaving heavy losses on both sides. Tomo finally realized that this slaughter seemed to have no end. This war felt as if it would never truly stop, and so, he made up his mind to desert and escape from the front lines. He stood up to say goodbye to his comrades, preparing to flee under the cover of night. Seeing this, his fellow soldiers urgently warned him that the consequences of desertion would be severe, but Tomo ignored them completely and turned away. Leaving without hesitation, his comrades hurried after him, hoping to stop him. Yet once outside the tavern, all they saw was endless darkness, and Tomo had already vanished into the night. In truth, Tomo had not gone far, but was temporarily hiding in a nearby stable. and it was there that he unexpectedly encountered the love that truly belonged to him. It turned out that the tavern owner's daughter had long noticed Tomo and had fallen for him at first sight. The two began talking back and forth, and through her words, Tomo felt a deep and genuine affection. Because of this, he abandoned his plan to leave the army so that he could continue seeing her. 1 week later, Tomo returned from the front line for rest and recovery. At the same time, he received a letter from Molly, the woman he once loved and who was now his sister-in-law. In the letter, Molly told him that his brother's child had been born, and they had named the baby little Tomo. After reading the letter, Tomo finally let go of his lingering feelings for Molly and resolved to pursue the love that truly belonged to him. He returned to the tavern again with his comrades, but this time, he never saw the tavern owner's daughter. He immediately asked the staff where the owner's daughter had gone, but the female employee merely glanced at Tomo and remained silent. With his mind full of confusion, Tomo went to the tavern owner and asked again, only to hear the man shout in grief that his daughter was dead. He told Tomo that a few days earlier, his daughter had been hit by a bomb while shopping at the market and was killed on the spot. The sudden news of the tavern owner's daughter's death caught Tomo completely off guard. Just as he was preparing to pursue love, the owner then began shouting angrily, cursing Tomo and saying, "It was you who killed my daughter. It was you soldiers who brought the war to our town." Listening to the owner's accusations, Tomo's heart was filled with turmoil and conflicting emotions. More than anyone, he wished this long, endless war filled with killing and death could come to an end. But as a small soldier with a fate just as tragic, what could he possibly change? While Tomo was drowning in sorrow, his second brother Charlie, who had been wounded and sent home, also faced a painful decision. He wanted to sign up and return to the army, to go back to Tomo's side. He could not rest easy knowing Tomo was alone on the front line, facing danger every single day. He wanted to return and protect Tomo, but faced with his wife's pleas and his newborn son, he fell into deep conflict. Their mother also urged him not to return to the army. For her, worrying about one son was better than spending every day fearing for two. After days of struggle, Charlie ultimately ignored his family's objections and resolutely returned to the battlefield, back to his brother Tomo's side. There, he once again saw his immediate superior, the narrow-minded sergeant who had held a grudge all along and was waiting for a chance to take revenge. Offending a sergeant on the battlefield came with devastating consequences. During a weapon inspection, the sergeant did not even look and declared that Tomo's rifle barrel was dirty. Immediately after, Tomo was punished and ordered to run while holding his rifle. More importantly, the sergeant deliberately targeted not Charlie, but the younger brother Charlie cared for most. Watching his brother suffer physical punishment, Charlie's emotions surged violently inside. But as a soldier, he could only endure the sergeant's hostility in silence. The next moment, Tomo accidentally fell, and the sergeant seized the opportunity to rush over and kick him repeatedly. Seeing his brother abused like this, Charlie's anger finally exploded, and after striking the sergeant, he was tied up and displayed on the training ground as punishment. For the next 3 days, Charlie and Tomo continued to endure the sergeant's deliberate harassment day after day, until one day, Charlie and Tomo took part in another assault together. This battle was extremely brutal, and many comrades fell during the charge. During the fighting, a shell exploded beside Tomo, burying him under dirt and debris. Charlie immediately ran over, shouting his brother's name as he desperately dug through the soil. Fortunately, he managed to pull Tomo out alive. At that moment, the two brothers and 3 other soldiers were trapped inside a massive shell crater. Before they could even catch their breath, the sergeant who had been targeting Charlie suddenly appeared and ordered them to climb out and continue the charge. The 3 other soldiers immediately rushed out of the crater, but because Tomo was injured, Charlie had completely lost any desire to fight and only wanted to stay and protect his brother. He directly refused the order, saying his brother was injured and could not continue, and that he would stay until the battle was over. The sergeant issued repeated commands, but Charlie refused to abandon his wounded brother. Enraged, the sergeant finally said that after the battle, both brothers would be sent to a military court, and then he climbed out of the crater to continue the assault. The battle was devastating, and nearly every soldier who took part in the charge was killed. Despite the heavy losses, they still failed to break through the German defenses. After an unknown amount of time, night fell and the gunfire gradually faded. Not long after, 2 soldiers suddenly jumped into the crater, the same comrades who had earlier charged out under the sergeant's orders. The group then left the crater together and quickly retreated back to their own position. In the early hours of the next morning, Charlie suddenly saw someone slowly approaching their lines in the distance. Looking closely, it was the very sergeant who had threatened to send them to a military court. A comrade immediately urged Charlie to shoot and claimed he could not see clearly, killing the sergeant on the spot. Otherwise, the sergeant would surely have the brothers sent to trial. Charlie raised his rifle and aimed at the sergeant, and the sergeant also saw Charlie aiming at him. After hesitating again and again, Charlie could not bring himself to pull the trigger and finally lowered the gun, sparing the sergeant's life. But the narrow-minded and vindictive sergeant did not spare them. Charlie and Tomo were both sent to a temporary frontline military court presided over by a major. They were both sentenced to death for disobeying orders. The execution order required final approval from the marshal. When the marshal saw that the two were brothers, he thought for a moment and then signed an order to execute one and release the other, to ensure that Tomo could live. Charlie chose death without hesitation. The brothers held each other tightly, sharing their final farewell. Tomo desperately clung to Charlie, refusing to let go, but no matter how he begged and cried out, Charlie could not escape his fate. The next morning, Charlie was tied to a wooden post and executed in front of everyone.
Present!
In the end, Charlie fulfilled his promise to protect his brother Tomo with his own life. After Charlie's death, Tomo was not allowed to return home, but was forced to continue following the army into an endless war. I am a movie enthusiast. Thank you for subscribing to my channel, and I will see you next time.